They can also email us, if they so desire, at
Oh, you
know
lost
it's
it.
because
relapse.
you reset my brain with all that tequila.
Wow.
Welcome to AT Banter, the podcast where we discuss anything and everything regarding the world of assistive technology. With our hosts, Steve Barkley, Rob Minot, and Ryan Fleury. Now, let's banter.
Hey, and welcome to another episode of AT Banter.
Banter.
I am Rob Minot, and joining me today on the Guitar Dungeon couch is Steve Barkley.
Howdy do.
And Ryan Fleury.
Hey there.
And we're sitting on couches.
We are.
Ryan was kind enough to switch around our configuration so that now we can record the podcast from the comfort of this lovely futon that I'm sitting on.
Much
Glad
better
you
than
like
those
it.
hard chairs. He's terrible.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Just
So
don't fall asleep.
no danger of that because we have an
Excellent.
incredible show lined up today.
We do.
And unlike our anniversary show, this one will be done sober.
Oh, okay, yeah. Should we talk about our anniversary show? I don't even know what there is to talk about.
I think
but
it speaks for itself, doesn't it?
it's going to speak volumes for itself. I just don't know if any of it's going to be intelligible. I have to edit that later this week, and
Good luck with that.
Mhm.
I know. So for those people who may be new to the show, we had our big 1-year anniversary show over the weekend, and we decided that we'd have a few drinky poos as we recorded, which looks great on paper, not so good when put into practice, especially when some unnamed person brings tequila to the party. We won't say who that was.
I feel no guilt. None whatsoever. I'm not ashamed.
So yeah, it was a little bit chaotic. Let's say I don't know what other adjective would you use to describe it?
I wouldn't say it was chaotic. It could have gotten way out of hand.
Yeah, it was slightly boozy.
Yeah.
It was boozy.
There was much abusement.
There was. We'll see how it turns out. So
Yeah, it might be a 10-minute show.
it could be once we filter out all the slurs and not slurs, but slurring.
No,
Slurring,
that's amusing.
There was a lot of slurring. It's very hard to say Google
Google.
when you've been drinking. That's what I discovered.
Google goggles.
Google, yeah, especially Google goggles. Google goggles are hard enough to say sober,
That's
but
right.
you get some drinks in you, and oh, good luck.
Yep.
And it's also hard to remember 52 episodes.
That's true.
But we had a lot of fun.
Absolutely.
So Ryan, tell us a little bit about who we are talking to today.
Today our guest is Erich Manser, who is a visually impaired triathlete and marathon runner who has used a new piece of technology called Aira to enable him to have sighted assistants remotely help him run the marathons and triathletes. So I'm looking forward to having him on.
Yeah, it's going to be pretty cool. This I watched the promotional video for the Aira system before the show, and it is pretty cool. Had you heard about this, Steve, before?
I had heard about it. Yeah. I've never actually seen it in action, but I have heard about it. I think we should also mention too that Erich is with the IBM research team that ensures IBM solutions are accessible too.
Mhm.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah, so we should talk to him a little bit about that as
He's
well.
not just another pretty face.
Clearly not. Not like us. We are all just pretty faces.
Pretty much.
Now, have you ever seen anything like this Aira system? Are there comparable services that they've tried before, or is this thing?
This is the first time I've seen it as a service. I mean, there's lots of people walking around using their cell phones and cameras to, call a friend and say, "Hey, what's this?"
Yeah, but I thought there was some
There was another
sort
app
of a
called
similar.
Yeah, there was another app called Be My Eyes.
That's it. That's what I'm
which,
thinking.
I don't know anything about it except there's an app called Be My Eyes. But again, you're connecting to somebody sighted who can, I think, look through your camera and tell you what you're looking at.
Right. But I think what makes this unique is that they're using the Google Glasses as one of the possible platforms for this thing, which is nice. It's kind of nice to see the Google Glass, being utilized and being developed, because it's an incredibly powerful piece of wearable tech. It's just that, it didn't really set the mainstream market on fire.
But it might after the news at Google I/O with the Google Lens. You tie that Google Lens into Google Glass.
That's true.
Yeah. You've got a very powerful piece of equipment.
Yeah. I mean, and I think, myself, I think it would be freaking awesome to have like a HUD, just like a video game.
Heads-up display.
Just like look around and be like the Terminator.
Yeah. That would be handy.
A wearable that people might actually use.
But just think about it. Like, think about where this technology could go in terms of, like, if you could get to a point where, Google Glass could, translate on the fly. Like, you could literally be talking to somebody who's speaking Spanish to you, and it would input that and then output into your heads-up display what that person was saying, like a universal translator.
Yeah. I
don't think that's far off.
Yeah, I actually just saw on Facebook there was an ad for a little handheld device. You press a button, you record what you're trying to say, and it'll translate into Spanish, English, of course, but it also does, I think, Mandarin, Cantonese, and Japanese.
And Skype can do that now. If you're talking to somebody in a different language, Skype will automatically translate that language. So I'll be speaking English to somebody in France, and they're getting the translation in French. They'll be speaking to me in French. I get the translation in English, and it's all done on the fly, real time.
Oh, that's so cool.
Yeah.
What a crazy world we live in.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Well, geez, if it just keeps going, another 10 years, who knows where we're going to be?
Absolutely. Yeah. So, shall we invite Erich Manser into our crazy world?
I think we should.
All right.
All right. Well, let's just leap in then. So today we are very lucky to have with us Erich Manser, who is a marathon runner and triathlete, and also works for IBM Accessibility, and just recently ran the Boston Marathon with some pretty cool tech that we're kind of excited to talk to about today. Erich, thanks so much for joining us.
Oh gosh, it's my pleasure, gentlemen, and congratulations on your anniversary.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, that was congratulations on surviving our anniversary.
That would have been one of the more heavily edited podcasts, I imagine.
Yeah, we decided that we would drink tequila while we recorded our anniversary podcast, and that looked a lot better on paper than it did in practice.
So am I on the show immediately after the anniversary episode?
No, I think what we'll do is I think we'll post you on Friday, and I think we might post our anniversary show on the weekend.
Oh, cool.
So you come first.
Well, that's a great milestone, and I'm humbled to be on your show. Following you've been killing it with the amazing guests lately, so I'm humbled to be here. So thank you.
Well, thank you very much.
Yeah, Ryan is our guest sign-up guy. He's the one who chases them down and tackles them and hog ties them until they agree to come on.
That's right. Send them $100 each.
But the funny part about it is it's usually not that hard.
No.
People usually say yes. We've never really been turned down, have we, Ryan?
Not yet, no. People just either ignore me or they come on the show.
Yeah, so. I guess technically ignoring doesn't count.
That's right.
They never overtly turn you down.
That's right. They just don't reply.
All right, Erich. Well, let's start with what exactly is your visual impairment?
Well, I have a degenerative condition called retinitis pigmentosa, or RP. And I was diagnosed pretty young, actually. I was diagnosed at age 5, nearby here in Massachusetts, in Boston, where near where I live, with this condition that leads to blindness. And so when I was diagnosed, it was really something that seemed so distant. Like I never, as a younger person, really considered myself even someone with a disability, just because, at a younger age, the most noticeable symptom of RP was night blindness. And, there are really in RP, there are a couple of symptoms that are notorious, like the night blindness and the diminished peripheral vision. And so, when I was first diagnosed, like my peripheral vision was still pretty good. And it was the night blindness that was really most noticeable as a younger person. And, things like going to school dances or trying to go to the movies with friends and things like that. And so, it wasn't until years later, and I'm 44 now. And, over time, certainly the peripheral vision kind of closes in gradually. And ultimately, with people who have RP, oftentimes what they'll notice is just the peripheral will close in until basically you have nothing left. And so I, have definitely noticed that, like all through even college, I never really identified as someone with a significant disability. It was more like this, night blindness nuisance almost that was right. Most noticeable. But, after college and once I started in the working world and, really started to notice some dramatic changes in the, level of impairment. And so, I could actually drive a car until about 15 years ago, and I gave that up, at a point voluntarily because it just didn't feel safe anymore. So really my path to blindness has been kind of gradual over many years. And, I've always joked that it kind of makes you very adaptable because you get used to seeing a certain way and all of a sudden it changes on you. And, what I have now, I described if you were to look through like a drinking straw and if you cover the end of that drinking straw with wax paper. So I've got kind of a small straight ahead circle of vision remaining. But, have felt very grateful for the amount that I've had for as long as I've had it and optimistic for the future with some of the exciting technology and advancements that we're seeing. So.
Yeah, there's some pretty cool research that's being done right now. Is there anything in particular that you're following? Any researchers?
Well, on the medical side, I mean, over the last couple of years, there have been some promising results with things like gene therapies. I've always had cautious optimism in the back of my head about, stem cells and things like that. I guess over time, over the years, whenever promising lab results have come on laboratory mice and things like that, like, you learn to kind of, not be skeptical, but, not get too excited because, you recognize that, when anything shows promise, it still takes many cycles and many years to actually reach, right. Fruition where patients are actually being treated. So, whenever something promising or exciting is announced on the medical side, I've kind of gotten to a point where I'm like, yeah, well, that's exciting and it sounds good, and I'll be excited to hear when they have something or when something gets passed with that. So yeah, it's been a process.
Yeah, it's a long road from working with zebrafish to human trials.
Absolutely.
So let's talk about your athletics. Now, were you a pretty big athlete as a kid?
Well, yeah, I as again at a young age, I had started actually in swimming, and then I started swimming I think when I was 6 or 7. So after I was diagnosed, and certainly still at a time where I didn't really see myself as anyone with a disability, and so I started swimming and did that for a few years, and then I got on to high school, I think, and there were, my high school didn't actually have a swim team, and there were other school sports that, seemed to have a lot more participants among my friends and, things like playing baseball or basketball, things like that. And so in my high school years, I actually deviated from swimming and tried some of these other sports and, found that over time with my visual condition, I found that, some of these things, although I was able to do them initially, over time became a little more difficult. And so, things like baseball, I have a very vivid recollection of, the point where my vision had changed just enough to make baseball more difficult. And, for a time there, I was doing very well and being able to hit the ball and field the ball with relative ease. And then, there was one distinct day where I was out in the field and, noticed that I could hear the crack of the bat, but had no idea where that ball had gone. And it wasn't until I heard the thud off to my right and, the remarks of people that, spectators that were surprised that I wasn't able or didn't catch it. And so, experiences like that, or with basketball, experiences in a dark or a dimly lit gymnasium where, someone would pass a basketball to you and it would be bouncing off your nose because you're, in this kind of poorly lit scenario. And so, over time, it was kind of like these sports that I had been able to do a little bit, gradually became more and more difficult or, not possible any longer. And so I gradually found my way back to swimming, so that by my senior year in high school, I actually had taken swimming back up and found that I was, even with low vision, was able to swim pretty consistently because, there was some consistency there, like things like the markings on the bottom of a swimming pool that indicate the lane that you're in. Like they usually have the lines that run up and down a lane, or, the markings on the wall that let you know where to turn and things like that. And so, it was almost fate, I guess, that I had started swimming, got away from it, but then by the end of high school, had kind of visually found my way back to it, and ultimately was very excited and proud to get a college scholarship just based on my ability to swim and be, a competitive swimmer. So by the time I got to college, I was, full on back into swimming, and that, carried me through my collegiate career there. So
nice.
Yeah, it worked out.
So when did you sort of make the switch over to marathon running? Did you start, or did you branch out into the triathlon first?
Well, no, it was, I always considered myself a swimmer. Of, my parents and my sister and myself, I was like the black sheep of the family because I was the only one who swam and they were all runners. Like I was the only, I was the oddball in the house. And so, again, I went through college, and here in the U.S., NCAA, Division I college swimming team, and, managed to, compete on the team throughout college. And then by the time I got out of college, I kind of had, developed a lot of this eating and drinking habits that support an active swimming lifestyle. But once the swimming went away, it didn't take long until, I noticed that I, kept eating and drinking the same way, but I didn't have the activity to offset it. So, within a year or two of getting out of college, I noticed I was about 70 or 80 pounds heavier than I had been.
Yikes.
I know that feeling.
Yeah. And so at that point, as I was struggling to tie my shoe because my big gut was in the way, I said, this is crazy. I used to be an athlete. And so, it wasn't, especially around, this was probably around the time I was giving up or getting to giving up driving. It wasn't so easy to get to a pool anymore, but it was still pretty possible to go out and go for a jog. And so, at this point, I kind of took up running more for weight loss. And then, as time passed, I actually started to link up with other runners who were energized and enthusiastic. And, before long and before I knew it, I had actually, my running for weight loss had kind of evolved into marathon running. And so, it just came this sort of infectious activity that, I had reached a certain point where if I missed a day of running, it got to where I felt out of sorts. And, so it just really became part of my routine. And then, from there, it just, again, became doing shorter races and evolved into marathon training and marathon running. And I did my first ever marathon in 2006.
Now, when you were jogging and training, marathon training, what kind of barriers did you have in terms of with your visual impairment, and how did you overcome those?
Yeah, it's interesting how it happened. Like when I took up running for weight loss, again, I was still not fully, picturing myself as someone significantly impaired, but that was when I would go outside my door and run around very familiar roads, that were well marked. And, at that time I was living in a neighborhood that was pretty low traffic, so it was pretty low risk. And I hadn't really started to feel the effects of the diminished peripheral field, in my day-to-day that much yet. So it wasn't until I started doing some of the shorter races. And if you can picture in a road race, a running race, in the very beginning, like at the starting line, it's like everyone is really packed in.
Right.
And, before that gun goes off, that's where it's people, you're almost like packed in like sardines. And, with a dwindling peripheral field of vision, that's where it becomes very, very noticeable. And, so even though in my earliest races, I wasn't running as I do today with a sighted guide helping me, where we're each holding the end of a tether, I was just running. And once the gun goes off, relying on the fact that we're all going in the same direction. And, so because I started to notice how significantly, diminished my peripheral vision had become, I started doing things just naturally by, just as a coping mechanism, I guess, of getting behind other runners who had no idea that I was following them.
Right.
But I would just get right behind someone who was going, similar or about the same pace that I wanted to be going, and would just get close enough to the back of them that other people around us wouldn't be tempted to kind of, fill that space or jump between us or anything like that. Because, at this point with my diminished peripheral vision, it was like, anyone that came from the left or the right it felt very much like they were appearing out of nowhere.
Right.
And, it could be very daunting, and, that's where you could lock ankles and things like that. And so, I just kind of developed this coping mechanism of following people who had no idea they were guiding me. And it was a few years after that, actually, after, I had been running in that way, I started to actually meet other blind and visually impaired runners around the country and around the, North America, really, that, shared with me things like, wearing markings that say visually impaired or blind, or, running with sighted guides. And, so I started to learn about these things that other athletes in similar situations were doing, and, kind of gradually found my way to that. And actually in the sport of triathlon, which, fast forward to 2010, I actually did my first triathlon as part of a group of visually impaired racers. And the rules for visually impaired competitors in that sport require you to have a sighted guide from start to finish. And so, in 2010, when I did my first triathlon with a sighted guide all the way through, it kind of made me realize what I had been missing, and gained an appreciation for the value of having a sighted guide, just for everyone's safety, but also for awareness of, what pace I was holding,
right.
Because the sighted guide could spot mile markers and reference the time on their watch and, read that information back to me. And I had just gone without that, that kind of information. And so,
right.
It kind of got to where, I realized what I had been missing, and got a taste for racing with a guide. And, there was really no going back after you had the benefits of it.
Okay, so I have to ask a question, because I'm tired just listening to you talk about running and swimming. Do you eat donuts and pizza?
Well, it depends on, how serious I am in my training cycle at any given time. If I'm gearing up for something that I consider to be, a kind of a key event or a key race for me, I try and avoid those things. But yeah, in the off season, all bets are off. I kind of indulge a little bit. So.
Excellent.
Ryan's just asking because he's a competitive eater.
That's right.
He was going to challenge you.
Well, I was probably looking the part with my 80 pounds heavier than I am.
So during the cycling part of the triathlon, does your sighted guy, is it a tandem bike then that you guys ride?
Yeah, it is. And, that was the big question mark I had when, one of my other visually impaired friends suggested. I had been running for a few years, and, I certainly had a swimming background. And so I had talked to some visually impaired friends, and they were like, well, if you have the swimming background and now you can run, you should be doing triathlons. And I was like, well, that's all well and good, but it's one thing if you're jogging at 6 or 7 miles an hour and you trip over an orange cone, or you hit a curb or something, but it's a whole different story if you're on a bike at 30 miles an hour. And I was like, how do you do that safely? And so that's when they turned me on to kind of the tandem cycling option and how people were racing these tandem bikes. And once I experienced that, because I could drive for a time, like it had been years since I had ridden a bike, basically since, here in the States, you get your driver's license at 16, and, from 16 until, however old I was, nearing 40 in 2010, like I hadn't ridden a bike at all. And so when I finally got on the back of a tandem bike, it was exhilarating, it was liberating, it was, really quite an experience. And especially where, in a running race where I'm basically locked on, visually like locked onto the back of the person who's right in front of me, like to be riding on the back of a tandem bike and, with what limited vision I do have, to be able to kind of look around and take in the scenery as we're flying through space, on this fast moving tandem bike was kind of a thrill. So yeah, once I took part in that 2010 triathlon, it was really, it kind of like I was hooked. So I definitely kind of got sucked into the triathlon lifestyle.
Now, how does the sighted guide work? Do you guys train together ahead of time?
Well, yeah, in an ideal world, that's the way it works. Completely humbly and proud, I'm very proud to say that, because I had a competitive swimming background and, I became a halfway decent runner, because the rules of triathlon require you to have the same guide from start to finish. Early on in my triathlon career, it was noticeably pretty difficult to find a guide that would help me kind of push my pace. I kind of quickly realized that my swimming friends weren't runners and my running friends weren't swimmers, right? So, so someone that could help me be competitive at all three events and not, be slowing me down on one and helping me race fast on another, right? So, it was kind of a challenge to find, an athlete that could help me push my pace all the way through the swim, the bike, and the run. And so it was an exciting moment. And, I've never been so delighted to find someone that could just destroy me at all three events as when I finally got linked back. The first person that I had guide me in triathlon was someone I had swam with in college. And he was, he'd been doing triathlons for years, and he was just, really, really fast and competing on an amateur elite level. And so, it was a thrill to find someone. And like I say, I've never been so happy to find someone that could just crush me at all three things. So, since that time, and, again, that was 2010. But since then, I've got about a half a dozen guides that I can rely on, at any given time that, can help me push my pace and be competitive. Depending on where and when the event is taking place, I've got guides that come and fly to meet me for races and things like that. My guide Steve that I raced with in that first triathlon, or that first year of triathlon, that was helping me push my pace. He actually lives out in California now, but he's able to come and meet me for races and things like that. So it's nice to have kind of a group of guides that I can call on as needed, depending on the timing and the circumstances. But yeah, it was kind of a tricky early on there.
And is being on a tandem bike, is it challenging? Because it looks a bit tricky, I have to admit.
It is, just because you have to coordinate everything. And basically communication is key. It's funny because in many races, we're very fast on a tandem bike. I mean, as long as it's a flat course or a downhill course, we're like a rocket ship, because, that's basically 400 pounds of person and bike, that's moving right along.
Right.
And so you'll hear the offhanded comments by other racers, saying things like, "Oh, I wish I had another person," or, like we've got some sort of an advantage. And then on the next uphill, all of a sudden these other racers come blowing by us, because that's where you're pushing 400 pounds of person and bike up that hill. And so it seems that on the big picture, it all seems to come out in the wash. I think it's deemed to be fair, because if there are a lot of twists and turns in a race course, that you lose a lot of momentum there. And so when you come out of a twist or a turn, like, you have to start building momentum again. And
right.
Another thing is that we basically don't really ever stand up out of the seat, or off the seat or out of the saddle, as they say, so that other racers on their individual bike, when they're working a hill, they can stand up and really crank that hill, where we basically remain seated. And so, there are a lot of differences in the tandem experience. And again, as I started to say, like, you need to coordinate everything. Like, if my guide, or on the tandem, they're called the pilot or the captain, like, if he's going down to grab a drink, like a water bottle, below him on the bike, like, he has to let me know that he's doing that, because, or vice versa, I need to let him know if I'm doing the same thing, or if I just need to stand up briefly just to just for comfort or whatever. Like, all of that needs to be communicated, because if it's not, then it throws off the whole rhythm of the bike. And
right.
It takes a lot to kind of for the guides to kind of steer that that big contraption with all that weight on it, so anything can throw that off, and before you know it, you could be off the road. So
right. So between marathons and triathlons, what's your personal favorite?
Well, I've come to identify myself as more of a triathlete. I still do marathons and participate in at least one or two each year, it seems. Here in the Boston area, I'm very active with a group, that was originally with Mass Association for the Blind. Now Mass Association for the Blind and Visually Impaired. They have what they call their Team with a Vision every year for the Boston Marathon. So I'm very active with them each year. That just really humbled and thrilled, that the blind and visually impaired field at the Boston Marathon each year just continues to grow and gain momentum. Also, every December out in Sacramento, California, there's the U.S. Association of Blind Athletes has the National Marathon Championships here in the U.S. for blind and visually impaired runners. So that's one I usually try and hit each year as well. And, again, anytime you have a big collection of, of blind and visually impaired athletes coming together, like at these events, the camaraderie and the shared experiences, it's about so much more than just the race itself. It becomes, just a sharing experience, and, really a moving. And in each of those instances, it's a weekend full of activity and just, networking and meeting other people and inspiring, hearing inspiring stories from people from all over the world that are coming to participate in these things. And it's a thrill to be a part of it.
Okay, well, speaking of the Boston Marathon, you just finished the Boston Marathon recently.
I did, yeah. This year was actually my 8th time running the Boston Marathon, and I did it in an entirely different way this time around.
Yes.
I have historically, as I mentioned, run with sighted guides, and in the Boston Marathon, because it's a very, very large field and popular race, like 30,000 runners all sharing one race course, can create some unique challenges. In most running races, you might be a mile or two into it before the initial congestion or crowd starts to break open. But in the Boston Marathon, that you can't count on that happening. Like, it's such a large field that, you can basically run from start to finish and be surrounded by other runners. And so as someone, with a diminished peripheral field, as I was describing, kind of that packed in like sardines feeling that I was describing before never really breaks open. And, add to that the fact that, every mile in the Boston Marathon, they have aid stations or water stops on both sides of the road. And so, you can count on every mile having a crisscross of runner traffic, trying to get over to get to those water stops and creating, kind of additional challenges. So, the Boston Marathon itself is uniquely challenging in a number of ways. And so it was a perfect testing ground for an exciting new technology that I had learned about last year. And we, really were excited about trying to put this technology called Aira through its paces and having kind of a challenging testing scenario for the technology at the Boston Marathon this year. So I was really excited to be able to take it with me on this year's Boston Marathon and try it out on the course.
Okay, well, could you step us through exactly what Aira is?
Sure. Aira, they build themselves as a visual interpreter for the blind. And the way it works is you have like a wearable mounted camera. In my case, the camera was mounted on Google Glass. And so it was a head-worn camera that I had. And on my smartphone, I have the Aira app, which allows me to connect with a sighted human assistant who is located somewhere else in the world. And as soon as I trigger the app and I'm able to connect with that sighted assistant, they are able to access the live stream video that's coming off of the camera that I'm wearing. And so typically, the technology, and it's a pretty new technology, but we've been hearing a lot about blind and visually impaired users getting great value from using Aira for things like grocery shopping or for getting help reading their mail or navigating the airport, things like that. So, the marathon scenario was definitely not, one of the existing use cases that we were hearing about. And honestly, we kind of went into the marathon challenge, so to speak, knowing that it would be kind of extreme testing for the technology.
Right.
It's not technology that was developed in any means to go out and run a marathon with. So we were kind of pushing the limits of it, and we knew that going in. But it was recognizing that Aira today is not a technology that I would simply hand to a blind person and say, here, go run a marathon. It was fun to imagine. Can you imagine if it could be that? Right. And so with the whole test in the Boston Marathon, I was most excited about being able to come back and share, what worked, what didn't work, and, have some suggestions to bring back to the Aira team and say, here's some areas that it could be bolstered or enhanced. And if you're able to do that, it might even push the technology to even bigger things. And so, it was fun to actually take the Aira solution through the marathon experience and come back and share, what maybe didn't work so well. And to be working with a team like the folks at Aira, one thing that I've noticed about them is they're very eager for feedback, just from general day-to-day users, but also in the marathon case, they've been very, very receptive and, welcome any feedback. And, it's exciting to know that they're interested in possibly implementing some of the changes that came away from the testing experience at the marathon.
Now, you also used a sighted guide as well as the Aira system during the race, did you not?
Yeah, I definitely did. We figured it would be a prudent move to still have a sighted guide there physically with me.
Plan B is always good.
Exactly. Yeah, where it was kind of it was an unprecedented test. So, we wanted to take all the same precautions we always have. I did have an IBM colleague of mine named David Way who was there physically with me. We were each holding the tether, and we each, I still wore the blind bibs and he wore the guide bibs. And so we took all the same precautions. But, in the years past, I at times have had other sighted guides with me as well. But this year, we had a second guide, but it was Jessica in Ohio accessing the Aira technology and helping provide, visual descriptions and some guidance that way. So I still very much consider that I had two guides on race day.
Right.
I had one there physically and one there virtually with us. So it was a cool experience.
So what kind of things worked really well?
Well, the things that worked really well were that, it was almost like a fortuitous coincidence that, the positioning of the camera on the Google Glass is basically right above my right eyebrow. So my preference in running races, for whatever reason, just, like being right-handed or left-handed, I guess, is that whenever I run with a sighted guide, my preference is always to have my guide on my left-hand side. And so that's where David, has historically positioned himself physically. So he's running on my left, and we're each holding the end of the tether over there. So it worked out really well that the Google Glass camera was mounted over my right eyebrow, because that kind of, filled in a space over there. It gave, Jessica direct view to a spot where I am naturally vulnerable, and especially in a crowded race like Boston. So having her be, getting the video stream that kind of came in from my right-hand side worked out very well. And, one of the limitations, I guess, of the technology that we noticed is that, the peripheral range of the camera, though it's better than my own, is still a little limiting.
Right.
Like, there were times where Jessica did need me to kind of scan my head left to right, just as I would do naturally navigating on my own. Like, she would ask me to kind of pan right or pan left just to get a better or a fuller view. So that was one point of feedback that I brought back to the Aira team and suggested if there's a way that they could, expand the field or the range of vision of the camera that's being used. And so that, they seem to take that and be looking into it. And so, it was wonderful that Jessica was able to provide what I was calling supplemental information, especially in a challenging situation like a crowded race course, to have Jessica be able to say, okay, you've got a runner on your right who's kind of drifting into your path. And, otherwise, if David on my left was, negotiating a turn or, moving to grab water for us or anything like that, if he was in any way otherwise occupied, having Jessica feeding me information, that was complementary to, what David was giving me was very, very helpful. So, if there were runners on my right that were kind of drifting into my path, it gave me the opportunity to be like, blind athlete or, somehow alert them to the fact that I was behind them. And, because otherwise I, very possibly would not see them at all until they were basically right in front of me. And so, another scenario was, in the Boston Marathon, we kind of stay right, because there are water stops every mile on both sides of the road. My strategy has been to kind of follow the center yellow line that runs down the middle of the road. So you're kind of positioned, in the least congested spot possible on that course. And so there would be points where we might lose the yellow line if it, got divided by an intersection or, other markings on the road. And so Jessica was continuously able to kind of, point that out to me and call out, keep me on track in that way and kind of keep me moving straight and, to the strategy that we had kind of laid out.
Right.
Another limitation that I brought back to the Aira team was, the fact that Jessica couldn't hear David and David couldn't hear Jessica was a little limiting, because there would be instances where they were both kind of trying to give me information at the same time. And, one couldn't hear the other. So, they didn't know. Ideally, if this Aira technology ever becomes something that a blind person could go and use only that to negotiate a marathon course, well, then it would be a non-issue. But, on the testing environment that we had, it was, there were instances where David was telling me something and I'd have to be like, repeat that or because Jessica was speaking in my ear at the same time or something like that. So, some other small limitations like that. But overall, having the color commentary that Jessica was giving out on that course was very, very helpful. And, again, David, as he always does, did a stellar job of, kind of being my main guy there in the physical form. So it worked out very well on race day.
So is there much in the way of lag time between the video feed?
It's less than half a second, and it's funny how we came to realize that, because that was one of the race day realizations, to be honest with you, was that, there is a lag, and more of a lag than we had realized beforehand, because I live in a kind of a quiet suburb about 40 minutes west of Boston. And so any of the practice runs or the rehearsal runs that I did with Jessica leading up to the Boston Marathon were done on these quiet backcountry roads where she could be as descriptive and detailed as the Aira agents, to their credit, as part of their training, they're trained to be. They're trained, they're almost given like introductory orientation and mobility training, because they're, they are working primarily with blind users, so they give sufficient detail in their level of description. So, in our test runs, our practice runs, I should say, out in these country roads, Jessica could be like, okay, you've got a left-hand turn coming in about 10 steps, or, and just really give me a good description and talk me through it. And so in that setting, we never picked up on any sort of a lag. It seemed instant. Like when she would describe something, it seemed to coincide exactly with when I was experiencing it. And so it wasn't until the Boston Marathon where all of a sudden you're surrounded by, other athletes, and it became very much a split-second situation where, an athlete could literally jump right in front of you. And all of a sudden, something that was less than half a second in lag time became very, very noticeable.
I'll bet.
And so that was part of the feedback that I actually, after the race, I did like a complete recap, which I would be happy to share with you guys, maybe for the show notes or whatever. But
that'd be great.
It was part of the feedback that I shared with the Aira team, was that this little bit of lag made such a difference in that split second scenario. So it was something that we hadn't picked up on before, but definitely noticed in the race.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I can see what you mean. I mean, it really was trial by fire, because I don't think it gets much more chaotic than a marathon field like that.
Well, the one blessing is that everyone is moving in the same direction. I mean,
that's true.
Yeah, but where you have people moving at different speeds, you have a lot of folks that are jockeying for position and, eagerly trying to get, either ahead of you or past you in some way. And so, all of a sudden it becomes very split second. So, made a noticeable difference there.
That's right. Jessica's like, oh, and there's a lovely water station there. Oh, Kenyon! Watch out for the Kenyon! Kenyon at 12 o'clock.
Absolutely.
So were you at the Boston Marathon the year of the bombing?
I was, and I thankfully had crossed, about 10 minutes before the first explosion.
Oh, wow.
And we had some, obviously many people that were, much more near the devastation and much more directly impacted. Thankfully, that year, my wife and daughters, for the first time ever, were actually viewing from the Team with a Vision viewing station, which is at mile 24 and not right at the finish line, because, for years prior to that, they had been coming right to the finish line. So thankfully that year it worked, and they were a bit removed from the chaos. But it was, definitely the loudest noise I had ever heard. And then, seconds later, the second one happened, and it was challenging to be visually impaired in that setting, because my instinct was to want to, this sounds braver than I feel like I am, but you want to figure out how you could help or anything you can offer in that situation. But my guide, to his credit, knew that with my limited abilities, you might be getting in the way more than helping, and so we kind of took our our path the other way and kind of tried to get away from the chaos and clear the area a little bit and get to safety. So it was something else, that whole experience, and certainly everything that unfolded after that. It's been unreal to see how everything played out. So yeah, it was quite a year. But 2014 remains one of my favorite years of the marathon, because it was such a spirit and a sense that you're reclaiming and not letting the terrorism win. So yeah, it was something to be a part of.
Now, are you already planning for next year's?
Well, the team at Aira and my friend Suman, who's the co-founder and CEO of Aira, actually is already talking about me doing it again with, to experience the improved or the enhanced features that are added as a result of this year's test. So I'm looking forward to that if we're able to put that together. But I've got actually a bigger challenge between here and then. In October, I've actually signed up for my second full Ironman distance triathlon, which I'm looking forward to. So just getting underway with the serious training now in preparation for that.
So no donuts and pizza.
I was just going to say that.
I'm back off the junk food. Yeah.
Now look out on Thanksgiving.
Now, are you planning on using the Aira system for that?
There's really no practical way at this point, unless they're working on something I'm not aware of, to be able to swim with it, as well as point. I'd love to get to a point where I could ride a solo bike with the Aira solution, but the swim and the bike, we haven't done much testing with it in those scenarios, but. Yeah, so I don't currently. I use the Aira solution, pretty regularly in my day-to-day. And so I'll certainly use it, around, race morning and things like that. But yeah, I haven't really been able to use it in triathlon training or racing yet. So
what are some examples of your use of it day to day?
Well, day to day, I actually get a lot of use out of it, for a lot of navigational assistance in kind of just like the regular scenario where, oftentimes, even though I live outside of the city, oftentimes I'll need to go in for, business meetings or customer meetings, things like that. And at times, I rely on public transportation to get there. So it's very helpful in a public transportation setting where, I can have an Aira agent with me, helping me find an available seat on the train, as an example. Or if I'm going to a meeting that's happening somewhere in the city that I'm not familiar with, oftentimes, actually last fall, there were a couple of times where, the Aira agents kind of pulled me out of a jam and, saved me from being late because I was going to places that I hadn't been before. And so, the ability of the Aira agent, once I connect with them to, be able to tell exactly where I am located, using the GPS, but also be able to give me turn-by-turn directions of where I'm heading is very, very helpful. They've done a lot to really kind of continue to develop the solution. Like recently, they've added functionality to it where an Aira agent, when I'm connected with them, can call an Uber on my behalf. Wow. And, as someone with low vision, something that's been particularly challenging for me with trying to use the Uber app, there are some minor, scenarios in the Uber app itself where contrast may be a little lacking or things like that. So, but I have historically been able to kind of pick my way through the Uber app to the point that I can call for a ride. But one thing I haven't really been able to do is, once I'm alerted that the ride has showed up and, that they've arrived and are there to pick me up, like so much of the information that the app gives you, like the Uber app gives you, is about like the color of the car, the make and model of the car, the license plate number. Like this is all stuff that I'm not really able to use. Right. And so my strategy in the past had been to, as soon as I call for an Uber ride, I would either call or text the driver once that's identified and say, I'm blind and I use a white cane. if you can look for me so that I don't have to look for you. Well, now with the Aira solution, they have the ability to call an Uber on my behalf. And as soon as all that information comes up, the color, the year, make, and model, the license plate number, they're able to, once the driver arrives, kind of guide me to where they are.
Right.
And they can, access the camera on my glass and say, okay, that's the car right in front of you, take 10 steps straight ahead, and that's your ride. And so, that's been a huge benefit, to not have to, just to kind of navigate to the Uber once it shows up has been a wonderful improvement. And so, things like that. Also, things like at a grocery store, or in my case recently, like at a pharmacy, right? Like if I, on Mother's Day, I think I mentioned I have a wife and 2 daughters, and I used to rely heavily on my daughters, like they're 11 and 8 years old, like to come in with me and help me pick out a greeting card for Mother's Day, right?
Right.
Well, now, the Aira agent can kind of help me do that. And so, it's not that my daughters ever complained about helping me, but, you'd like to feel like you can kind of do things without leaning so heavily on your family at times,
right.
So the ability to kind of go off and do it on my own without leaning on my family. And, even though they're wonderful and a great support network for me, it's nice to be able to, still feel some sense of independence in doing these types of activities. But even, another example with the Aira solution is at my oldest daughter's soccer game. I used to sit on the sidelines and, kind of be able to generally, with the amount of vision I do have, follow the action a little bit. Like I could tell where the cluster of people was, but, I wouldn't not really be able to distinguish my daughter from any of the other players, on her same team with the same color jersey. But, if I am on with an Aira agent and I say, okay, my daughter is number 11, and, there she is, and that's her jersey, like they can kind of, as long as I kind of move my head with the activity out there on the field, like they can kind of tell me, oh, she just made a shot on goal, or, give me kind of play-by-play details a little bit. And so, all of these new and different, and, there are so many new subscribers to the Aira solution that, we're hearing new and different use cases like this every day, where
right.
people are just finding really interesting ways of using the technology. So it's really something to be a part of it. It's kind of a cool thing.
Yeah, it's very neat.
Can you use Aira without Google Glass?
You can. And actually, when I started using Aira last year, the way it worked out, actually, Suman, the CEO there, and I were both part of the same technology panel that happened nearby here in Cambridge. And we were both on the panel talking about, different aspects of technology. But at the end of it, he and I got to talking. And as someone who was losing vision myself, he was describing, what Aira is and what their team was doing. And, so I was intrigued and fascinated. And so, by late summer or early fall last year, I actually became an early kind of a beta tester for them. So I started using the technology, testing it out, the second half of last year. And so all through last fall, I was only using it on my smartphone. And I hadn't even received the glass part of it, or the wearable camera part of it yet. So, at that point, it was basically once you trigger the app, it accesses your smartphone camera. And so, as long as you're holding that camera up in front of you, and you're connected to an Aira agent, like they're able to see what's coming through your smartphone camera, right. Which was great. And again, very compelling, situations. And again, that's how I was using it when they pulled me out of those jams where I was going to be late for meetings and things like that. But the thing about that was, because I use a white cane, that's one hand that's occupied, and then I've got my second hand holding the phone now, so you have no hands left.
Right.
And so by the time it got to be January of this year, and I received the Google Glass that went along with it, kind of that wearable element, that kind of freed up my hands, so it made it more of a hands-free experience, which really just enhanced it as well. So it was. It's possible to use it with only the smartphone app and the smartphone camera, but the benefits of being able to wear the camera and have them see what's directly in front of you from that is very helpful as well.
Right. And is there a cost for the service?
There is. It's a subscription-based service, and they have tiered pricing. It's almost like buying a data plan. Like they give you X number of minutes for a certain dollar value per month, and again, there are tiers. I know I'm on the entry-level plan, and I want to say I forget how many minutes I get, and I haven't exceeded them yet, and I use it pretty regularly, so it's not bad. But it was like $89 per month for the entry service, and then it goes all the way up to unlimited minutes, which I think is $199 per month, and I know that the team at Aira is very aware and conscious of the fact that, kind of a monthly subscription like this, is can be kind of cost prohibitive for some users. So they're very sensitive to that fact. And as they continue to roll out the technology, they just got, a pretty impressive Series B funding cleared as this technology rolls out. So, with every advancement that we're seeing with the technology, they're also working to kind of keep the costs manageable and pull things into alignment as they go with the rollout here. So,
just really quickly, I just wanted to ask you a little bit about your work at IBM Accessibility.
Sure.
What do you do there?
Well, I'm part of the IBM Accessibility team, which actually falls under IBM Research. And so, it's very interesting work. It's really like no 2 days are the same. My team at IBM, our number one kind of responsibility has historically been to make sure that all the teams at IBM are doing things in an accessible way. Whether you're developing a new software application or, a smartphone app or whatever, the various teams at IBM are working on, our concern has been to make sure that they are kind of adopting the accessibility standards and doing things that kind of follow, with the accessibility standards that exist.
Right.
And so, with that, there's been kind of a lot of user testing. As someone who relies on assistive technology myself to be able to use the computer, the ability to offer feedback to these various teams and say, here's where you can make some changes. You might want to tweak the contrast, that's being used of the, text against the background in this case, or, just as examples, be able to offer that kind of feedback. But also, many of my colleagues and I actually are also very active, contributors to the standards. There are like the Worldwide Web Consortium that works to kind of define those global standards for web accessibility. We try and remain in active roles or maintain active roles in kind of helping shape those standards. So we like to contribute actively to what the future of accessibility will look like in that way as well. Aside from kind of the day-to-day, tasks of trying to enable the teams at IBM to do things in an accessible way, there are also what I kind of think of as, I guess, special projects that I get to work on that are always very interesting. There is some interest from my team here at IBM in the tests that we did at the Boston Marathon with the Aira technology. Candidly, I would love to see some of our Watson capabilities incorporated into the Aira solution, just to, kind of for whatever enhancement or bolstering that could bring. But another project that I happen to be working on currently that I'm very excited about is has to do with self-driving technology. As someone who myself had to give up driving 15 years ago, the prospects of self-driving technology are very exciting, but also, full of question marks. And, as we've seen, oftentimes can happen. There can be technologies that make it to the market without ever fully considering all possible users of that technology.
Right.
And where, self-driving, in my mind, self-driving technology stands to uniquely benefit, many with disabilities and many, just naturally aging.
Right.
And so it would be a shame to see that technology kind of make it to the market without, ensuring that users from these groups are able to operate it independently. And so, this project that was announced earlier this year, IBM is partnered with a couple of organizations. One is the CTA Foundation, which is the group that puts on the Consumer Electronics Show every year in Las Vegas. And the other is a company called Local Motors. Local Motors is based in Arizona, and they produce 3D printed vehicles. And so one of their vehicles that they produce is a shuttle van. It's a 12-person shuttle van called Ollie. And the Ollie shuttle actually already has Watson capabilities built right into it. And so the announcement that was made earlier this year at the CES show in Las Vegas was that IBM and Local Motors and CTA Foundation were all going to work together and work to make Ollie the most accessible self-driving vehicle that there is, which is a bold claim, but we kind of left the CES show committed to return next year to the CES, with some demonstrable examples of how Ollie can be, an incredibly accessible self-driving vehicle. And so that's been an incredibly gratifying project to be a part of.
That's amazing.
Cool.
We might have to actually reach out to you and maybe bring you on to talk about just that for one of our future podcasts, because that's fascinating stuff.
Or we'll just have to do a road
absolutely.
trip.
I mean, it's definitely an iterative process. Like we've held workshops, that have included members of, various disability organizations, but also, with the aging population, and so just including members of these various groups and getting their feedback has allowed us to really kind of develop some compelling use cases that at this point in the process we're actually working on putting actual solutions to address some of the challenges that have been expressed in these workshops. So it's as it continues to develop, it would be exciting to come back and provide updates on it.
Sounds good. It's a deal. All right, Eric, we're going to let you go.
Well, actually, one question before we let you go. Do
Sure.
you work with Guido Corona?
I don't work with Guido Corona directly, but I've heard the name. I'm not sure how.
Okay. Well, he's part of IBM Accessibility, I think, in Texas. I think he's in Texas now.
Oh, wow. Okay. Yeah, he's probably in part of the Austin team, like our advanced technology group, working on accessibility.
Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah. He used to be up in Toronto. I touched base with him years ago over OS2.
Oh, very cool.
Yeah.
Oh my God! If I ever become a private detective, that's going to be my name.
OS2?
No, Guido Corona. That's amazing. Guido Corona, private detective. I love it.
Well, he's a great guy. I was hoping you could say hi to him for me, but I'll have to do it myself.
Well, I'll find him in the email here.
All right, Eric. Thanks so much for coming on and taking some time and talking with us.
No, it's my pleasure. Thanks for having me, guys.
Best of luck in the upcoming triathlon.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Okay, Eric, we will talk to you again soon.
Very good.
All
right,
thanks.
Take care.
Bye-bye.
Well, I feel fat.
I am fat. Got to start doing my stairs more often.
Well, get that tandem bike. You guys have been talking about doing a tandem bike for ages.
That's true. That is true.
Get her going.
Well, see, the issue will be, well, we won't have an issue going down the hill, but as soon as Steve's got to pedal my ass up the hill.
Well, you have to pedal too.
We just won't go in that direction.
A tandem doesn't.
We live on a hill.
Well, it's fairly flat over towards the park in behind you here.
Is it?
Yeah.
All right. So we'll just go around and around the park a few times.
Exactly.
See, I think Ryan just thinks he just puts his feet up like that and it just lets you
That's
pedal.
right.
That's not what tandem means.
I have a
No.
sneaking suspicion that's what's going through his head.
Oh, but that's amazing. That's really. We should actually try to maybe reach out to somebody from Aira and talk a little bit about
Write it down.
about the app and what's
What's coming.
Yeah, see if they're actively developing it and what kind of stuff they've got. Because it's I watched one of their promotional videos online before the show, and it's pretty cool. Yeah, it looks like it's pretty cool stuff. So, and it doesn't sound like the price point's all that prohibitive.
No,
it's
I
not
mean,
not bad at all.
Given what it can do for you, what a terrific service. That's crazy. It's like being connected to the hive mind.
That's right.
Yeah. Well, and I think that they're absolutely right. I mean, I think that the applications for it are limitless. Everything from helping with mail to watching a softball game.
Yeah. Yeah.
Which I wouldn't have even thought of. So
cool.
Hey, Ryan.
Rob.
Where can people find us?
Online at atbanter.com.
They can also email us if they so desire at atbanterpodcast@gmail.com. And hey, Steve, where else can they
get us? Well, they can also get us at let's see, they can get us on the Facebooks, they can get us on the Twitters.
And you know,
I heard rumors of an Instagram.
There are, yes. Yeah. We were supposed to take pictures at our anniversary show of that, and something happened. Go figure, the anniversary show fell off the rails. I mean, who thought that could possibly happen with tequila?
That's right.
You know what? Tequila actually wasn't originally part of the plan, in our defense.
No, it's true.
That was a curveball thrown.
Pure insider. I did.
But see, you're the one typically taking pictures of the Instagram, and you barely had any tequila, so there's no excuse.
Whatever.
How's YouTube coming?
Shut up, Ryan. All right. I think that's going to do it for us this week.
Yay.
I have been Rob Minot.
I've been Steve Barclay.
And I've been Ryan.
Ryan who?
Just Ryan.
Just Ryan.
Just Ryan? Are you like Beyonce now?
Just Ryan now, yeah.
No, all right, everybody.
Next week I'll be a symbol.
All right. Sorry, I had images of what symbol could it be and going through my head.
Yeah, I'm sure.
Yes. All right, we'll talk about that later.
Yeah.
All right, everybody. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you all next week.
This podcast has been brought to you by Canadian Assistive Technology, providing low vision and blindness solutions across Canada. Find us online at www.canasstech.com. That's CANASSTECH.com, or call us toll free at 1-844-795-8324. For all your assistive technology servicing needs, call Chaos Technical Services at 778-847-6840, or find them online at chaostechnicalservices.com. Music provided by bensound.com.